Welcome back to Route 64 Sacramento. Today we are going to show you how we use landscape fabric in our market garden. Landscape fabric achieves three primary functions when used properly. 1. It blocks sunlight, starving plants of the energy they need to grow. 2. It reduces evaporation, which is essential to keep soil organisms happy and active and saves water. And 3. Heats the soil, capturing solar energy and, if the soil is moist, conducting it down into the soil, quickly killing young weeds during the warmer months and helping to keep the soil more biologically active during the cooler months. This effect only occurs when the fabric is directly exposed to the sun, so during the summer when crops are large and shading the beds, we can still use the fabric without causing problems with excessive heat. It is also important to note that landscape fabric is semi-porous and allows a small amount of light and air through, as you can see here when the fabric is backlit against the sky. Because of this, landscape fabric is less effective than our solid, non-porous plastic silage tarps at all of these functions. However, the landscape fabric does drain and breathe better, leading to less standing water and better soil health overall, making it a better tool in many cases so long as you're getting sufficient weed control. We use DeWitt Sunbelt 3.2 ounce fabric and it comes in these 300-foot rolls. It can be cut with scissors to fit your bed length. We typically cut 100-foot lengths to fit our 90-foot beds so that we can ensure good coverage at both ends. This fabric also comes in several different widths. We have a very typical market garden setup on our farm with our bed spaced at 48 inches center to center, allowing for a 30-inch bed top and 18-inch paths. So we use the 48-inch wide Sunbelt, which is perfect to get complete coverage even if we're covering two beds side by side as in these strawberries. One important note before we begin discussing the ways that we do use this fabric on our farm. We do not use this fabric in permanent installation. We have found that perennial weeds such as Bermuda grass and nutsedge eventually find their way through the fabric, and a year or two later, we have a matted mess of plastic buried in our soil and the weeds are back. Not worth it. But there are three typical scenarios where the landscape fabric has become indispensable in facilitating productivity and efficiency on our market farm. 1. In covering bed tops. 2. In covering pathways. And 3. On short-lived perennial crops. In keeping with regenerative agricultural practices, we try to avoid leaving exposed bare soil on our farm. So, if there is any reason we need to hold a bed for a week or two, rather than letting the weeds grow wild or leaving the soil to dry out and lie dormant, we cover it with landscape fabric. When we are done harvesting a bed, it might be fairly clear, such as in the case of this old bed of Japanese salad turnips. When we harvest turnips, we take the entire plant, so only small stragglers and stunted weeds remain. We can apply fabric to this bed directly. In other cases, we might have a lot of residue remaining, such as in this tomato bed. The flail mower chops up the plant material, speeding up decomposition and allowing the landscape fabric to lie down flat. We do not need to clear the bed before covering it. In fact, the residue breaks down best in the warm, moist conditions under the fabric, returning nutrients to the soil exactly where we want them. If you do not have access to a flail mower, you might be able to use loppers to chop up larger plants and lie them flat, or you might need to remove the bulk of the plant material and compost it elsewhere. In other instances, there might be a lot of well-established weeds, as in this former beet bed. In this case, we might try to uproot the weeds with a power harrow, tiller, hoe, or digging fork before tarping, especially in the fall and winter when it won't get very hot under the fabric. These weeds are quite large and well established, and it will take a very long time for them to die of light deprivation alone. Here we have a weedy path that has already been covered for almost 3 weeks, and these weeds, they are actually still alive. A quick pass with the harrow or a wheel hoe will help the decomposition get started right away. In this particular path, however, the soil is too wet to harrow or to hoe, so we have no choice but to cover it and to wait. Okay, so now back to our tomato bed. We store our fabric in rolls or neatly folded. To unroll the fabric, we usually weigh down one end with pavers and start unrolling. You can also use sandbags, old tires, cinder blocks, or even T-posts, whatever you have on hand, to pin down the edges of the fabric. We've found that a brick every 5 feet along both edges, along with heavier pavers on the ends, is an easy, affordable solution for us. Once your bed is covered and you've pinned down both ends and along both edges, it's time for your fabric to get to work. We typically leave the fabric for 2 to 3 weeks, but it could be longer or shorter, depending on the time of year, what type of plants you're trying to kill, what material you're trying to decompose, and when we need to plant the bed. When we remove the fabric, in order to prepare this bed for planting, we collect our bricks and pavers and roll it up neatly or fold it. We try to store the fabric in the shade to avoid unnecessary UV exposure during the warm months, and because we've found that the fabric rolls left out in the sun during the colder months create a warm and protected nesting area for rodents. After removing the fabric, there might be some residue remaining, but if you dig into it, you will see that the soil organisms have been hard at work incorporating the organic materials. Depending on how much is left and how clean of a bed you need, you may need to rake the remaining material into the pathway in order to prepare this bed. Alright, so for the second scenario, covering pathways. We will do this year-round, sometimes leaving fabric in the path for just a couple of weeks in order to kill off weeds. We might do this before applying an organic mulch, such as rice straw, coffee chaff, wood chips, or leaves, which prevent newly germinated weeds from getting enough light, but which established weeds might be able to grow through. For certain summer crops, if straw isn't available or if we just don't get to it, we might leave the landscape fabric for the entire harvest season, as we did for these tomatoes. As a side note, the drip tape here is located under the fabric, allowing us to apply water directly to the soil without evaporative loss. Keep in mind, the landscape fabric is not effective at killing all weeds. This Bermuda grass will need to be pulled and its rhizomes dug when we turn this bed over again, and in the meantime, we will watch it carefully to ensure that the fabric does not become infested. In order to cover a path, we also might need to fold the fabric, commonly in half, to provide complete coverage of the pathway, as well as the sides of the bed. Established weeds near the edges of the fabric will likely still get enough light to survive, so you do want to pull the fabric as wide as possible, pin the fabric down well, and keep the edges well cultivated and weeded. For this odd, narrow bed, we did pull the fabric back slightly from the crop rows in order to cultivate the edges of our planting area about 2 weeks ago, and we might replace it back against the edges of these crops later if it remains too wet to cultivate. For the final use of landscape fabric on our farm, on short-lived perennial crops, we actually burn holes into the fabric using a flame torch and a template. There are many videos online of farmers doing this, and you can even purchase fabric with the holes already burned into it. You'll of course want the holes to be burned at whatever spacing works for the crop you intend to plant into that fabric. We use 3 rows at 12-inch spacing for both our strawberries and our perennial herb bed. We replant each of these every 2 years for several reasons. One of which is that these beds do eventually get infested with Bermuda grass, both through the holes and eventually through the fabric itself. We will be replanting this bed this coming winter so that we can remove this fabric and solarize this Bermuda next summer. More to come on that process in a future video. Okay folks, thanks so much for tuning in. We hope that you find this process to be an easy and efficient way to control weeds and support healthy soil on your own farm or in the garden.